Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we are on day 354 and we're covering Gaudium et Spes 78 on Peace is More Than Just No War. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan in more details at sqpn.com/Vatican. Yesterday we began Chapter 5, the Foster of Peace and the Promotion of a Community of Nations. Today we'll conclude this section before the sections. There's two numbered sections. There's two numbers yesterday and today. Before then, yesterday the topic was we need to seek peace beyond just no war. And today the summary and topic is peace about seeking the goodness of all and being peacemakers, not just no war. So we see this kind of repeated theme here that they're talking about peace as avoidance of war, but peace also in a deeper meaning. Paragraph 78 has 6 subparagraphs. We'll read them in 3 parts. A, peace and goodness to people and society, not just no war. B and C, peace starts with each and includes personal safety and other personal goods. D and F, D to F, sorry, there's E in there. We are all called to be peacemakers and to strive to avoid violence. So let's begin with 78A. Peace is not merely the absence of war, nor can it be reduced solely to the maintenance of a balance of power between enemies, nor is it brought about by dictatorship. Instead, it is rightly and appropriately called an enterprise of justice. Peace results from that order structured into human society by its divine founder, and actualized by men as they thirst after even greater justice. The common good of humanity finds its ultimate meaning in the eternal law. But since the concrete demands of this common good are constantly changing as time goes on, peace is never attained once and for all, but must be built up ceaselessly. Moreover, since the human will is unsteady and wounded by sin, the achievement of peace requires a constant mastering of passions and the vigilance of lawful authority. So this subparagraph, the beginning of this paragraph, introduces our main theme. Peace is not merely the absence of war. And that's important to realize because we can so often just reduce it to that. Sometimes there's a kind of peace at all costs mentality, which doesn't really look at the deeper meaning of peace. The Council Fathers note a few things here. There's no peace if the government is largely unjust. Doesn't really distinguish exactly between slightly unjust and completely unjust governments here, because almost every government is at least slightly unjust, slightly imperfect. And it needs to have this kind of justice. It can't be dictatorial. It needs to have this idea of human development. Are these people developing economically, socially, spiritually, etc.? Next, it talks about peace comes from order in society. And we need to live that order. That is important how we operate in society. And then it concludes this idea that peace is a constant work. We are all fallen human beings. We've all contacted the contagion of original sin. And thus peace is needed as a constant effort to avoid the kind of war and falling that is natural with our fallen nature. Moving on to 78B and C, peace starts with each and includes personal safety. Let's begin. But this is not enough. This peace on earth cannot be obtained unless personal well-being is safeguarded and men freely and trustingly share with one another the riches of their inner spirits and their talents. A firm determination to respect other men and peoples and their dignity, as well as the studied practice of brotherhood, are absolutely necessary for the establishment of peace. Hence, peace is likewise the fruit of love, which goes beyond what justice can provide. C. That earthly peace which arises from love of neighbor, symbolizes and results from the peace of Christ which radiates from God the Father. For by the cross, the incarnate Son, the Prince of Peace reconciled all men with God, by thus restoring all men to the unity of the one people and one body. He slew the hatred of his own flesh, and after being lifted high by his resurrection, he poured forth his spirit of love into the hearts of men. These two subparagraphs remind us that peace means each person is safe. Really, more B is about that. And safety is not just physical, it's also psychological, spiritual, etc. If someone lives in constant fear, that is not peace. And this ultimate peace goes back to the full respect for human dignity. Recently, I've been listening to a few things on some abusive history in the church. And you really see how the lack of dignity to different people was the start. That we need to show that dignity at the beginning. And ultimately, peace is a fruit of love. In 78a, it mentioned that this work is of justice, but now it extends that to even more so it's a work of love. Because love doesn't go against justice, it perfects justice. Obviously, love in this sense is the same as charity, not a romantic love. That doesn't make sense in this context. Hopefully that's clear. And then moving on to 78c, it talks about where we get earthly peace. We get it from God. And it resembles his love for us. His peace is a resemblance of his love for us. And where do we get peace? Ultimately from his cross and from his resurrection. This is something where we can look at the divine mercy image where there's that red and white grace flowing out from the heart of Christ. And that's the kind of image that is presented to us here, where from his cross, from his resurrection, we get the peace and joy we need. Ultimately, God pours out his Spirit and brings unity through that pouring out. Moving on to D through F, it talks about how we are called to be peacemakers and should strive to avoid violence. 78D. For this reason, all Christians are urgently summoned to do in love what truth requires, and to join with all true peacemakers in pleading for peace and bringing it about. E. Motivated by this same spirit, we cannot fail to praise those who renounce use of violence in the vindication of the rights, and who resort to methods of defense which are otherwise available to weaker parties too, provided this can be done without injury to the rights and duties of others or the community itself. F. Insofar as men are sinful, the threat of war hangs over them, and hang over them it will until the return of Christ. But insofar as men vanquish sin by a union of love, they will vanquish violence as well as make these words come true. This is from Isaiah 2. They shall turn their swords into plowshares and their spears into sickles. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. That final image we have there from Isaiah 2 is a classic image of peace, right? You're turning the swords into tools for harvesting grain. And that's the reality of it ultimately. But going back to the beginning of this section, we see that Christians are all called to join peacemakers, to be peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, right? We talked about that yesterday, I think. And we see here there's this praise for nonviolent protests. This was something that really started out just before the Second Vatican Council. You had Gandhi in the 1940s. In India, you had Rosa Parks and the Birmingham bus boycott in the 1950s. So we see this whole attitude of how this is happening. And the church praises this nonviolence. Mind you, the church does not make it so that violence is always forbidden. There can be cases where there's injustice that needs violence to correct. But there should be a preference for nonviolent means if possible. Finally, 78F talks about how we're all sinful. We're all fallen human beings, and due to that, there's always the possibility of war due to original sin. But ultimately, we are looking forward to the eschatological reality, that end of time, the resurrection which is, the new heavens, the new earth, heaven, however we want to talk about it. In that reality, there will be no more war. And so, this idea of turning all our weapons into tools is something we can look forward to, at the very least, in that eschatological reality. Hopefully we can bring something of it about before the end of time, but we can be guaranteed that it will be there at the end of time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue with the next paragraph in Gaudium Spes. That's paragraph 79, on natural law is above civil law and important for peace. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which will provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. There's also an SQPN Discord at sqpn.com/Discord, and on there you'll find a channel from Vatican II in a Year.